Today is our last session. We're going to talk about this. Yeah, I actually put it up in an woord for words in the English translation, so you can read it on there. That is the last chapter from the book that we. I think we have had them all then. Yeah. And so if you are interested, after Christmas, normally we run with the topic through the year, but now because Kath Moyer is coming as our visiting fellow from Sydney at the end of January, she will do the seminar sessions of the coming term, and they will focus on biological thought and the German left. So there is, of course, a long tradition of study of biological ideas and influences of biological ideas, biological thinking, evolutionary thinking on the German right, but not so much on the German left. But from the 19th century, you see, of course, a very conscious discourse in Marx and Engels, but also later on in others, around what evolutionary theory and development in biology mean for our understanding of the human being. So that is what her topic will be. I don't know exactly how she's going to do it. I will obviously hear more about that, but if you're interested, you're very welcome to attend those sessions. There will also be a symposium on that topic around April time. We haven't fixed the date yet, but we've got some guest speakers, and we're going to set that up, or at least she will set it up when she's here. And that should be interesting. But now we're going to focus on our final chapter. So, as I said last time, we have looked at the essence of language, das Wesen der Sprache. We've looked at the way to language. What that way is, a way to something where we already are. We've looked at the dialogue, so the conversation, and now we're, of course, still circling around the same thoughts as always, but now we are looking at the word, and that's an interesting or an important thing for us to think about. What is the word? What does it mean to speak a word? What is a word? If you look at, let's say, linguistics, or the linguistic scientific study of language, the word is very obscure category. On the one hand, in linguistics, in general linguistics, there's always this saying that the lexicon, so the idea that the words that we have in language, or how these words are structured, what they are, is one of the great remaining mysteries in the study of language. Not that there are many others, but there's relatively little consensus on what the nature and the structure of lexicon is in let's say, in language processing. It's a big topic, and at the same time, from the scientific study of language, the reference to the word as a category has really vanished, I would say. It, of course, is an important topic in traditional grammar. The basic grammar that we get from the Latin and Greek authors. There, of course, the word is a big concept, but in most theoretical frameworks that we have today in study of language, I think it is not, let's say, an ontologically basic category. It's very interesting that, I find it very interesting, I don't know if it interests you, but that's just my history. So my teacher is still very much alive. Peter Søren, who was a linguist in Oxford and Cambridge, and then came to the Netherlands, but he was Dutch. In the school of Chomsky in the 60s, and later on developed his own theory of language. And he's now retired, of course, but very influential linguist. And he was a student of a man called Reichling, who was a Reichling, so it's a German name, Reichling was professor of German linguistics in Amsterdam in the middle of the 20th century. And he wrote a book called The Word, das Wort. And so this Reichling became in Dutch linguistics of the 20th century, quickly became the butt of jokes, because he had in the light of Chomsky and what happened in the study of language after the Second World War, he had a completely phenomenological, intuitive approach to language study. But this book, Het Woord, which was translated, was influential for a while, and so it's a big study in which he tries to argue that we have to look at this category of the word as a kind of fundamental unit, a kind of gestalt, a holistic thing that in which language, everything about language comes together, and in the act of speaking a word, there would be something originary about the linguistic act. So by reflecting on the word, you would get to understand something about the nature of language. I think that didn't make it as a proposal in scientific linguistics, but I think something of that inspiration is also here behind Heidegger's text on the word. And so I think to some extent there is a kind of general intellectual climate in which, of maybe phenomenological orientation, in which the idea that you can learn about language by thinking about what words are is what was considered a viable road, a methodos, or a form of being on the way to language. And from that perspective, it's always interested me this concept is this phenomenon of the word, what it is. It seems to me that somehow there is a kind of een verlegenheid, that we don't really know what, so that, and that is in the case of linguistics, but also if we think philosophically about language, comes a point where we don't really know what a word is, right? We use words all the time, but if we were to ask the question, well, what is a word? Then I think, unless any one of you has an idea, I think that is something that defies, to my knowledge, it defies expression, maybe even, yeah. And so I thought it might be nice to discuss this chapter, which takes up some of the themes that we have already seen, especially around the poem, to take it up from the perspective of, well, what does it say about the word? Das Wort, the Stefan Georg poem, so lernt ich traurig den Verzicht, kein Ding sei, wo das Wort gebricht. So I renounce the sadly sea, where word breaks off, no thing may be. And so, looking at this chapter from the point of view of, so what does it say about the word? What might we learn here? And maybe, so to make a list again of the things that we can talk about. So we should talk about this word. We should talk about saying again, but saying as versagen, or translated as renunciation. Try to get to an understanding of what versagen means, and then something around silence or schweigen. Is, I think, important. And again, the poetic, sort of the poetry thought relation, which comes up at the end. So there are several, in this chapter more than in the others, poetry is interpreted. As we're drinking wine, I can sort of speak freely, of course, also that after a while this got a little bit on my nerves, this, as I reread it, it got a bit on my nerves, the way he deals with the problem. So we can hopefully get to what that is about as well. So, what is a word? Or what do you think? Is that even a relevant question in regard to this chapter, or is that something we could have a discussion about? He says it himself, huh? On page 221. Man ist versucht, die Schlusszeile in einer Aussage umzuformen, dass Inhaltes kein Ding ist, wo das Wort gebricht. One is tempted to turn the final line into a statement with content. No thing is where the word breaks off. Wo etwas gebricht, besteht ein Bruch, ein Abbruch. Einer Sache Abbruch tun heißt, ihr etwas entziehen, also etwas fehlen lassen. Das gebricht bedeutet, es fehlt. Wo das Wort fehlt, ist kein Ding. Where the word is missing, there is no thing. Ja? Das verfügbare Wort erst verleiht dem Ding das Sein. It's only the word at our disposal, das verfügbare Wort, which endows the thing with being. Was ist das Wort, das es solches vermag? What is the word what are words that they have such power? So, let's try to summarize that. What are words that they have such power? Can I also, refer you to the very beginning of the text? We should always start with the beginning. I'm sure Heidegger would say that too. In that, that my earlier question then, what are words that we have such power? Of course, we can start the whole thing about that we have already seen about language being unverborgenheit, the unconcealed of things. But this chapter starts with a problem. It starts with the observation, dem einstigen Ort des Erscheinens der Götter ist das Wort verwehrt. Das Wort, wie es einmal schon Wort war. The word is withheld from the former place of the God's appearance. The word as it was once word. And he supports this by the reference to Brot und Wein. Warum schweigen auch sie, die alten heiligen Theater? Warum freut sich denn nicht der geweihte Tanz? Why are they silent too, the theatres ancient and hallowed? Why not now does the dance celebrate, consecrate joy? So something has happened in the sense that the word is lost, right? How was it before? Im Sagen selbst begab sich das Nahen des Gottes. The approach of the God took place in saying itself. Saying was in itself the allowing to appear of that which the saying once saw, because it had already looked at them. And this is something that's now gone. Right? So the chapter starts with the realization that das Wort ist uns. Words have been taken out of our mouths, right? Is that correct? We are not able to that is where this text starts, by saying we are not able to, or we don't have access to the word. Is that correct? Nico, is that correct?
I think something that I found difficult when I was reading the text was I wasn't quite sure if Heidegger was saying things in different narrative voices, as it were. So when he's talking here about, well, basically sort of saying in the beginning there was the word, and now we don't know what the word is, I sort of wonder if it's kind of steps in a kind of narrative that he's setting up. So he's kind of setting the scene just to change it all over again, and it keeps changing what his viewpoint seems to be. So I wasn't sure.
So what do you mean by that?
I don't know how. So by changing his viewpoint, I mean that he seems to be taking up different voices. So sometimes he takes on the voice of what he calls the poet's voice, and here he's using the quotation. So the way in which he's writing is almost as if he's paraphrasing an interpretation of the poetry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he's speaking in this paraphrasing voice, and so it's not clear to me whether because he's not using the subjunctive, he's using the indicative. It seems to me that it does seem to be Heidegger's opinion, but he's also speaking in this paraphrasing form. So I'm not sure how seriously to take this idea that there is no longer a word, the word.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. What do others think?
When is that?
Here at the beginning.
No, I mean, when is the text?
That's a good question. You see, I'm so decontextualized, I haven't even thought about that. I don't know. Do you know that? You know much more.
When was this book written, or when was it? It was, I think it's the later 50s. Can't remember how.
Yeah, all of the text published in 1959, so is it around?
It says here only the text in its present version was delivered as a lecture during a matinee celebration at the Burgtheater in Vienna under the title Dichten und Denken zu Stefan Georges Gedicht das Wort. But it doesn't say when. But it must be the 50s, right? Yeah. But that's nice, Burgtheater in Vienna.
Yeah.
So, as a philosopher, we've made it to the Burgtheater in Vienna. That's good.
It's 1958. So you have the German one actually in the Inhalt. So
it says 58. Yeah. Okay. Good.
And they're celebrating the poet, right?
They're celebrating Stefan George, yeah. That's the context, that's immediate context. Yeah. So this question about
for whom is the word lost?
For whom is the word lost, and what does it mean to talk for a whole lecture about the fact that the word is lost? Well, I can give an answer to the question. Let's say there is a schoolmaster answer to this question that you ask, and that is just to say, well, Heidegger is of course here paraphrasing Hölderlin. Why? Because Hölderlin for him is the poet of the loss of a relation to being, is the one who has forefelt or has experienced, as the first time, the Geschick of the rule of technology, the Gestell. So what we've seen in the previous chapter, the previous lecture, this whole business about way and method, way versus method. That's where this starts. The loss of the word means the loss of the way to the word, and it's restless, it's remainderless subsumption under the rule of technology. When way becomes method, then that's Gestell, as it were. Then the word is lost, right? That would be sort of. I don't know. That's my feeling about it. That would be the kind of answer that would get you full marks in an exam. And he does say, indeed. I'm just looking for it now. what I still ponder and what I still frame, what I still love, their features are the same. That is page. Was ich noch sinne und was ich noch füge, 229 in the 217, 216 in the German. Was ich noch sinne und was ich noch füge, was ich noch liebe, trägt die gleichen Züge. Sinnend, fügend, liebend ist das Sagen. Ein still frohlockendes sich beugen, ein jubelndes Verehren, ein Preisen, ein Loben, Laudare. Laudes lautet der lateinische Name für die Lieder. Lieder sagen heißt singen. Der Gesang ist die Versammlung des Sagens in das Lied. Erkennen wir den hohen Sinn des Gesanges als Sagen, dann wird er zur nachträglichen Vertonung des Gesprochenen und Geschriebenen. That seems to me an indication of this absence of the word. Pondering, framing, loving is saying, a quiet, exuberant bow, a jubilant homage, a eulogy, a praise, laudare. Laudes is the Latin name for songs. To recite song is to sing. Singing is the gathering of saying in song. If we fail to understand the lofty meaning of song as saying, it becomes the retroactive setting to music of what is spoken and written. So to say that the word has been lost means that the word is that which ponders, frames and loves, that which lets being appear, that is lost. In other words, he is talking about the Seinsvergessenheit.
But is this word the same as das Sagen?
That would be the hypothesis that Wort is language as saying. Yeah. So Wort always means poetry or laudatio. That would be a bit. That would indeed be the conclusion of this. So when we think of Wort, like Mr. Reichling in his book, we have to think almost of a speech. I wanted to talk the language of the philosophers in the speech act. Yeah. What do you think? Do you think that's not correct? That Wort is sagen?
Well, I've just spied a sentence by chance later on page 222 where he says, das Wort lautet die Sage. But I kind of feel like sagen is sort of a way to discover words or to discover the power of words, but it is not necessarily equivalent to the word.
So what would you say the word is then?
I think that it's a red herring. I think that it's kind of put into the text to enable you to experience the phenomenological intuition that Heidegger wants you to undergo. He's deliberately not telling you what the word is or what words are. And I think there's a kind of ambiguity. When he first started, I thought, which word are you talking about? You know, which are you trying to define the word? Are you trying to define words generally? Are you going to come up with a particular word that you're going to reveal as what is actually the word of the title? So for me, it's sort of a way of hooking you in to get you to look for something and to keep you reading, but to so to go along with his wordplay.
Right. Yeah.
Because as you said at the beginning, words are something that no one can really define what they are, but we all know what we mean by words. So from a Wittgensteinian perspective, meaning is its use in language. The meaning of a word is its use in language. does that mean that meanings don't exist at all? And it also reminded me of a short story by Borges, where I can never pronounce the name, but it's something like Schlo, Ukva, something Orbis, something. Anyway, there's basically, it's kind of about an encyclopedia that then imagines an imaginary world, that within that imaginary world there's also a mythical world in which there are no nouns.
Yeah.
So there are no nouns because the people, their language uses only adverbs, verbs, etc. So in the same way that the German language can make nouns out of verbs and adjectives, that's what these people do, and so they don't acknowledge the existence of a noun. So in the same way, you're looking for what a particular word means and you're coming across them all the time, but you never kind of get a grasp on how to define it as an entity.
Yeah. That's interesting. I agree.
So I think sage is kind of a cross between sagen and sagen das. Or, I don't know, expressing something. I think that sagen is him trying to talk about language as a way of showing,
Yeah.
but not merely formalistically. So I think that he would defend himself from just trying to trick you with this text. He's not just trying to be clever and write a beautiful text.
So is when he says sagen, is that what Wittgenstein means when he says zeigen?
No, that's not. No, I don't think Wittgenstein means that. I think that Wittgenstein distinguishes between sagen and zeigen a lot in his early work, and less so in his later work. Whereas I think Heidegger is trying to find a compromise, because I think that in a way he doesn't want to be a philosopher of language. So going back to the Gespräch von der Sprache, as opposed to über die Sprache. And so I don't think he actually likes talking about Wort and Sprache and so on.
That's right, he says that,
yeah. So he wants to invent something that talks about the experience of language, or kind of shows you something about language. So shows you that it is impossible to understand something without being able to confidently, once and for all, define it. So sagen is, well, die Sage is actually an example of that, because those who are familiar with German will be able to get a sense of what he means, but they also know that it's not a word you can find in the dictionary. So I suppose that's almost kind of like a phenomenological parable for the search for das Wort, in a way, when we encounter die Sage.
That's right. Okay, yeah. So in that sense, Wort and Sage are. When he says Wort, he's trying to get us to think about what he means by Sage, right?
Well, he's getting you to think about how to define terms.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's kind of using Sage as a new word for Wort, but he's using Wort and Sage in similar ways because he's trying to get you to think about how you define something at all.
Look, so he says, dem einstigen Ort des Erscheinens der Götter ist das Wort verwehrt. Das Wort, wie es einmal schon Wort war, wie war es denn? Im Sagen selbst begab sich das Nahen des Gottes. So the word, das Sagen, war in sich das Erscheinenlassen dessen, was die Sagenden erblickten, weil er sie zuvor schon angeblickt hatte. Solcher Anblick brachte die Sagenden und die Hörenden in die unendliche Innigkeit des Streites zwischen den Menschen und den Göttern. Diesem Streit jedoch durchwaltete jenes, was noch über die Götter und Menschen ist. Wie es Antigone sagt, nicht Joyce dann war es, der mir die Botschaft gab, sondern anderes. Jener weisende Brauch. So we've seen all of that in the previous chapter, the Brauch. So the language of as Aquinas is that which brings gods and man together in this cathedral. And okay, well that's so Das Sagen is the showing of that which the ones who say saw or had in view, because it had already looked at them. And that is the word. But I think so. What you're saying is that we should not attach some sort of magical meaning now to this concept word. It is a more rhetorical strategy to allow us a certain experience of language.
And also because that technique is used elsewhere, so when he splits words up like Bewegung and fahren, things like that, his constant use of wordplay, I think, means that you shouldn't kind of take die Sage too seriously as something special.
Okay. Right. Okay. So that's been your views throughout the weeks that we have to demystify a lot of the language here. We can do that. So I think that's a very important, a very interesting proposal. So maybe we can answer that question or get a little bit closer to that question as well when we then start to ask ourselves, so what then is said here is there a main point that's made about das Wort or die Sage? And it seems to me, I don't know what you think, but that somehow that is Versage. So if anything, this chapter tries to get us into an experience of what Versagen is, renunciation. And is that correct? Yeah.
What's the English translation of the die Sage? Is that a word as well? Is it an alternative?
I don't know actually how that is.
Is die Sage, is it different from saying with a capital S?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. So the hard-nosed Heideggerian would probably say that the technological, metaphysical nature of English comes across in this gerund, in the fact that there is no, so that it all becomes one, and just as being means both sein and seinness, so it's confused. So saying is just as confused about the difference between sagen and sage. But I don't know how what the translator has done with that. Can somebody answer that question?
So die Sagen die Sage and sagen could both be translated as saying.
I think that's what they have done.
I think you got the English one there. Okay.
I think that's what they've done. Yeah.
There was a point where he talks about Georg using the word Sage, and die Sage also means kind of legend or tale or something like that.
Yeah, saga.
So it is also a word in German, but Heidegger uses die Sage as a neologism, but then he also picks up on Georg using the actual word Sage, and sort of tries to kind of draw a connection between his neologism and
it's interesting
use, which is completely arbitrary, but that's what Heidegger does.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. He would, of course, strongly oppose, I would say, to this classification of sage as a neologism. You know, neologism, that's... So he would say, no, I'm hearing this word
I'm not making it up, I'm
in its original dispensation.
Well, this discovery.
Yeah. I'm not, so neologism, that's...
He would say,
neologism
is finden.
Yeah, erfinden is finden. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Erfinden is still finden, just as versagen is still sagen. And verzichten Das Verzichten betrifft als sich versagen das Wort selbst. That becomes what does that become in translation?
In German, this is where the sagen comes out. So it's kind of after this, these three verses that are quoted. He's quoting an untitled poem from the collection on page 125. Yeah, it looks like this is
Yeah.
das Vorlaute sagen.
Renunciation speaks affirmatively.
Yeah, you've got the right. Okay, so it's saying. Yes, so the English translation is saying with a capital S.
As self-denial, that is, as saying, renunciation concerns the word itself. Renunciation gets the relation to the word underway, toward that which concerns every saying as saying. We suspect that in the self-denial, the relation to the word gains a nearly excessive intimacy. That's page 150 in the English translation, and 219 in the German. Das Verzichten betrifft als sich das Versagen, das heißt als ein Sagen des Wortes selbst. So we might say, okay, maybe as a kind of way to do justice to what you said. Wort, in this text at least, means language as saying, that is aware of itself as renunciation. Kein Ding sei, wo das Wort gebricht, where word breaks off, no thing may be. Right? Heidegger says, let's hear this in a different way. So, just as he did in the text on the Satz vom Grund, principle of sufficient reason, nothing is without ground. So, nichts ist ohne Grund. Means everything that exists has sufficient reason, otherwise it wouldn't be. But it also means nothing, the nothing. Das Nichts ist ohne Grund. So, it opens up in language, it shows us, it opens up an experience of the groundlessness, the Abgrund, das Nichts im Sein, the nothing in being. Right? So just by hearing nothing is without ground, hearing that in a different way, we hear as we're the backside of it, and it puts us in touch with something that cannot really be said in any direct way, but that can be hinted at in that way. I think it's the same with kein Ding sei, wo das Wort gebricht, where word breaks off, no thing may be. Sei is the subjunctive, maybe, no thing may be. So where word breaks off, where the word fails, or where the word breaks off, literally, wo das Wort gebricht, that is the nature of versagen, renunciation. There, kein Ding sei, so nothing may be. That's where we can experience the the ground of all these things, they're the unground of all these of beings as they appear. But in the word understood as a renunciation. Yeah? And then the next step is to say, and he then later on in the chapter he turns this renunciation around. He says it's not just that the word is renounced, so that I do not have words, but it's also that I renounce myself to the word. So the poet is the one who renounces. The poet is the one who, by renouncing, so by being aware of the versagen that is in all saying, is the one who can speak poetically, in other words, who can let language light up from this nothing from which it comes, that which lies behind gods and man, the Brauch from which all of this comes. That's why poetry is poetry, because it puts us back into the abyss, as it were, and therefore, so that's why Das Wort is such a central poem for Heidegger, because here in this poem, in the poetry, it is in that movement is expressed, and it shows us two things. It shows us that Wort and Dien belong together. No Dien without its Wort, no thing without its word. And at the same time, it shows us that in itself is referent to something that has nothing to do with things and words, and that is the ground from which language and the world, language and word, as it were, arise. So, das Verzichten, or is that self-denial, not just the word is denied to me, but I deny myself to the word. That's what he says, that's the term that he makes. That is as saying, renunciation concerns the word itself.
So when he says the word is denied to me, is it a particular word that he has in mind? Is it the fact that you find it difficult to say things about being or the ground of existence? Or there's some kind of fundamental concept that we can't put into words adequately.
Yeah, but it's not a concept.
Something that we can't put into words. So it's a single word that we're lacking in that first instance of denial. The denial of words to us.
Sorry. So do you think that, could we make up a word for it? Let's have another neologism. That.
Yeah, I don't know. So that in the English translations is being with a capital B. Is that the word that we're missing?
Yeah.
I guess what?
No, that can't be it.
Because it turns it into just another entity then. Like any other, but it's something more fundamental.
Yes, that's what you would have to say, right?
That's the problem. So being is like it's not an adequate solution. In some sense it flags up this question and this problem that Heidegger wants to address, but at the same time it distorts it in an unacceptable way by transforming it into another entity.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm wondering is if that's is that what Heidegger means when he's saying about the word or words being denied to us? Do you think it's that particular issue?
And I think, well, that's how I took it. also to say we have to deny ourselves to words.
And that's the other
In order-
side of the coin.
Yeah, in order to get to this, as it were. So that's why it says we have to schweigen about schweigen. So we have to. So silence is of course a name. You might say is a name for that, but not when you speak about it. So you have to. And that's why it says that it's a sagen, which is grounded in silence, or however you want to put it, but without the silence being said itself. Or silence coming to word, because that's not so. The point is to schweigen. We have to remain silent about silence. That's a very Wittgensteinian idea, I think.
Yeah, I was certainly reminded of the final sentence of the Tractatus when I was reading this passage. I think one important thing to bear in mind is that versagen does actually also mean fail, and so I think that situating to fail.
To fail.
So when it's used without an object, just as an intransitive verb, but you can also have jemanden, which means to somebody, to deny something to someone when you use it that way. But as a verb on its own, it can also mean to fail.
Yeah.
So in the context of modernist poetry, talking about failure of language, I think that's also what Heidegger is also engaging with here. So I think in answer to your question, is a particular word that is denied to us? I think that Heidegger is dealing with this general language skepticism that you find in this sort of poetry.
Language skepticism.
This feeling, this general feeling that you can't express something, or can't express something perfectly, and so that's quite a big trope in modernist literature. And it was interesting what you were saying about poetry being poetic because it's denied words or because it fails. And I was reading a book recently called The Hatred of Poetry by Ben Lerner. And he says that the way in which poetry works is that it's striving for something impossible. And so it looks very poetic because it's striving for this ideal expression of something perfect and beautiful. And in failing to do so, it indicates what it was striving for.
Yeah.
And that's also very similar to the process that Heidegger writes in, because he's constantly saying it's not that. It's not this or this. It's not that. And so you get this feeling that you're constantly moving through different possibilities, that it's not quite, it's not quite, it's not quite. And so as you're reading, you gradually get the sense of what he might be getting at. So perhaps you could say that Heidegger's also trying to be poetic. If he believes that poetic means showing by failing to do something, then
That's
I
right.
think that's kind of what he tries to do in his text.
That's right. Exactly.
This idea of negative definition.
I totally agree with this, and I just wanted to stress the fact that in the first page he speaks about a strife or a fight between gods and humans. So here, and I don't know how is it in German, but it's very interesting that he talks about the infinite intimacy of the strife between man and gods. So there's a fight between man and gods, but it's precisely in this fight where man and gods are the closest possible. And so it is in this place that something like this Luke could appear. And what it seems to me is that Heidegger's way of writing in general, and especially the second Heidegger, always deals with this attempt, which is almost a fight against something which is ungraspable. And here the references to the gods, for example. And the nature of this fight is precisely described by renunciation as a matter of, as a means of saying something. And I think that it could be expanded to a general understanding of what philosophy is and what to philosophize means. So, because it's impossible to philosophize without words, and sometimes we experience this loss of words in order to grasp a concept. But nonetheless, it's precisely when precisely within this attempt that we can describe something. So maybe turning around it, maybe so, and I think that at the first time it could be just a paradox. So we renounce, the versagen als sagen could seem a paradox, but it's a dynamic of thinking, which is not a definitive thinking, and this is what Heidegger looks for. And for me, it's interesting that this is described by the word strife or fight. It's like a philosophical fight against something which is ungraspable. This is what.
And what he does in the next sentence is that he says, there's something that goes beyond this fight. So he's constantly introducing these dualisms and then saying, but we've got to go beyond that. And then he doesn't say how. He just introduces a quotation and then talks about a puzzle and then kind of goes on to the next thing. So he's constantly introducing these fights.
Exactly.
And then saying, well, of course we've got to get beyond this dualism. So he never actually gets you beyond it by saying, the way to get beyond dualisms is da-da-da-da-da. But he's trying to constantly make you do that exercise.
Because I think, as we were saying before, that if you use a single word or a single concept to trying to go beyond this dualism and to describe what's this third part beyond it, then it won't be just beyond, it won't be just one part of it, just as a new monism in a certain sense, and not beyond this this dualism. And this is probably, as I can understand him, the reason why he doesn't want this fight to end, and so he keeps on fighting. And the nein really annoyed me because...
He says that.
he says it over and over again.
Jein, we would say.
Nein.
Yes and no, yes and no.
But, I mean, are we not now making Heidegger into a kind of Baroque artist? To get back to the theme of the Baroque. He does use the word fugue, of course, all the time. So in the fugue you have that same thing, this polyvalence of melodic lines that all are independent or could stand on their own, as with Bach, for example. And when you put them together, they do precisely what we're saying now. They make silence audible simply by this constant being in this strijd miteinander. So do you see? So now, see what I'm saying? We have put in your interpretation. Have we not now put das Unsagbare outside of language, and have said, it is by having this strijd, by saying ja or nein all the time, that we sort of get at it. Whereas that would be like my view of that would be still a kind of metaphysical thinking, because you would put das Unsagbare on outside language. You've got the Sagbares here, and you've got the unsayable there. And now by speaking in a certain way, we can hint at das Unsagbare.
It's the same argument that people make against the Tractatus, where they say he's chickening out. So it's seen as an anti-metaphysical text, and he talks about das Unsagbare, And he says, wovon man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen. So what you can't speak about, you must be silent about. And so people take that to be him saying that there is such a thing as something which is unspeakable, that lies beyond the system. But
Exactly,
I think it's only metaphysical in the sense of the ghost in the shell. So when people make debates about artificial intelligence, for instance, and when it arises, is that a metaphysical conversation or not? Are they saying that consciousness exists as something which is introduced to a system, or is it a behaviour of the system? So these kind of debates exist in lots of other areas too. And I think that intuition is not a way around metaphysics. And I think also Heidegger says himself in the Gespräch that he's not necessarily anti-metaphysical, but he's kind of trying to do something else.
That's right. So my question is, I completely agree also with your remark about the Tractatus, that's completely true. That's my view of it. But my question is this an adequate reading of Heidegger? So, what we were just now proposing was to say, oh, Heidegger is kind of Wittgenstein. That was my question is that an adequate interpretation of the text? Whereas, because you might argue that what Heidegger is actually saying is that sagen is versagen. So you can't have one without the other. He's precisely, that's the Johan 9. He's getting away from the idea that here you have what can be said and here you have what can't be said. It's only in saying that what can't be said even exists and the other way around. Yeah,
but I think in order to get this idea of this relationship between saying, sagen and versagen, you have to in advance to know that there's something to be heard even when nothing is said. And this is like, for example, his approach to tell people that language is not only that everyone is hearing me saying right now, but it's something that is, between the lines or something that I try to say but I cannot find the right word to say it. But this is a very particular perspective of language that he thinks there is this, mythical essence or mythical nature of language there, just hidden there, that we have to find out. And in order to find out, we have to know how to hear the language saying. Because in the earlier text that we read, he also talked about that we should not just try to express what we want to say, but also listen to how language speaks to us.
Yeah.
Like the language. So there is this interaction. It's actually not only from our side language, but also like there is this thing from language to us. But in order to do it, I think there's a presumption that one has to adopt Heidegger's view of this mythical understanding of language. That is not actually that we are totally in charge of language, but language also has this power or interaction with us, which is the saying and that cannot be said, but still in some way it is said.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is right, or it's a good guess, and I think it's exactly not what Wittgenstein will agree with. Because for Wittgenstein it's just...
Yeah, certainly not the later Wittgenstein, and I think also the earlier Wittgenstein just wanted philosophers to shut up, which Heidegger is not doing. So if you go back to the passage which was on page 219, where he's talking about, he says that, so he's quoting kein Ding sei, wo das Wort Gespräch, which reminded me a lot of what cannot be said, you must be silent about. And then he says, die doppelte Verneinung ist eine Bejahung.
Yeah.
So he's saying this double negative of saying when no thing is, there can't be a word for it, or words break down. He's saying, well, that's also encapsulating the possibility of language as well. So what the early Wittgenstein wanted to do was to show that merely by speaking we show the possibility of language. And when we don't speak, we show what's not possible. And it's as simple as that. So Heidegger doesn't want to say it's as simple as that because he's talking about poetry here. So, Heidegger wants to explain why is it that I feel something even when something doesn't appear to have been expressed.
Yeah.
So the reason why we get this kind of mystical dimension here is I think Heidegger is trying to explain what this poem is doing, whereas the early Wittgenstein is talking about language philosophers more generally.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but that's right. But so in that passage, he says, so it's a doppelte Verneinung, is eine Bejahung, der Verzicht sagt an Dingen sein, wo das Wort gewährt ist. The thing can only be where the word is granted. Der Verzicht spricht bejahend. And then he makes actually the same point that we were just saying. Die bloße Absage erschöpft nicht nur nicht das Wesen des Verzichtes, sie enthält es gar nicht. Der Verzicht, so what is that? The self-denial, yeah, I think, hat zwar eine negative, aber zugleich eine positive Seite, so it's a negative and a positive side, doch die Rede von Seiten ist hier verfänglich. So to talk about sides is, let's see what it said, talk about sides here is misleading. In so doing, sie ordnet das Verneinen und Bejahende einander gleich und verdeckt so, dass sie im Verzicht eigentlich waltende sagen. In so doing we equate what denies and what affirms, that's like saying saying is here and non-saying is there, and thus obscure what truly rules in saying. Und so, dass im Verzicht eigentlich waltende sagen. It's actually not a correct translation, right? So what this obscures is the saying that rules within the Verzicht. Oh, is that correct? That's wrong, right? The translation is wrong. Sie verdeckt das Sagen, das im Verzicht eigentlich waltet. Ja?
What page is it in English translation?
Yeah, so 150 in the translation.
150, okay.
Do you see that sentence? In so doing we equate, it's a little bit below the middle. In so doing we equate what denies and what affirms, and this obscure what truly rules in saying. Yeah? Do you see that? Siehst du das? Yeah. Now look at that Germaans.
Okay. Yeah, what denies.
That's this sentence.
Yeah, okay.
Ja. Sie ordnet das Verneinen und Bejahende einander gleich und verdeckt so, dass im Verzicht eigentlich waltende Sagen. So she obscures the saying that rules within Verzicht. Yeah? That's completely gone there. In so doing we equate what denies and what affirms and thus obscure what truly rules in saying. No, the saying is obscured, which rules in self-denial. You get it?
No, yes.
You could throw away 50 years of secondary literature on Heidegger in English. Do you see what I mean? Or am I wrong?
So, well, he's talking about Beda obscuring the sagen. And so when the English translation uses the word we, I'm thinking back to Veda and Disman and so on and so forth. So perhaps the English isn't wrong if you interpret it in the idea that, oh, hang on, what's Veda in English? No.
Okay. The job was said, here it was leaving, and then the order does.
It is clear that the saying that rules within Verzichten, in self-denial, renunciation, that is obscured by saying das Verneinen und das Bejahende are two sides of the same thing. They are sind einander gleich. And that is not the case. And that is precisely the point where, so Heidegger it's my Vorschlag for interpretation, where it moves beyond this, the saying is here, the unsayable is here, the unsayable is there.
Und verdeckt was sagen. Objekt ist sagen, right?
Yeah, see, the sagen is object.
Object of rede. So if we speak this way, we cover, we conceal
Exactly.
the precise.
Yeah. The talk of two sides obscures the saying that rules within verzicht. That's what it says.
The same.
And then he even says this above all has to be thought through.
So is this the saying that rules in renunciation?
Exactly, and that's precisely why it moves beyond saying the sayable is here, the unsayable is there. Yeah?
Yes. And then the translation.
So now, of course, whether that is viable, whether this is actually makes sense as a
So it's this.
as an idea, that's another question. Yeah?
But don't you think what he talks about here is a very, very specific way of talking?
Yes, of course, yeah.
So in a practical level, of course you can say sometimes people talk like that because there's a special purpose to serve. Or some people talk like that because they have to, I don't know, create an artwork with words, poem, or essay, or novel, whatever.
Yeah.
But on a practical level, how realistic it is actually in telling us what language is. Because he, in an earlier text that we read, where he talked about the method of science, he says, what wins is not science itself, but the method of science, which also determines what science is.
Yeah.
So depending on the method, it will be determined what kind of object you see. That is, what kind of specific understanding you can obtain from a certain thing. And here, I think it also applies. Of course, if you say in a specific way, especially the way that Heidegger tries to show here, I think it's possible to get this kind of experience and then probably to somehow agree with him about the nature of language or what language exactly is. But how realistic it is that this kind of view can apply at all. I mean, this is just so specific. Even in his time, people do not talk like that.
Yeah.
Only in special occasions. So I'm not sure, because it seems to me just so demanding that I'm asking myself, is it really what he believes to be the nature of language, or what he wants the nature of language to be?
Yeah. Well, okay. So my initial response to this is to say there is it seems to me that there is a kind of purism in Heidegger, that he feels that this is the only way to say it. The moment we relax and we say, well, you can make this point in 100 different ways, then I think we lose something about what he thinks. That's my hunch, but I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah, I agree, because then he'd be out of the job.
Then he'd be out of the job,
And
exactly.
also he'd be saying there's no difference between literature and philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, all the metaphysicians have also made the same point, more or less.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that there's no sense of rigour or skill to being a philosopher. So he's trying to say, what's the point in trying to think better? So I think that's why he's a purist, because he's trying to justify why you would study philosophy at all. What does it do for you?
Yeah, and more than that even, his philosophy. Not just any philosophy, his philosophy.
Mm.
It's my way or the highway. That's the That's my feeling about it, because otherwise, the moment we start to say, well, you know, oh yeah, I get that, I know what he's talking about, yeah, I've had these feelings myself, etc., as Žižek would say, and so on and so on, then it completely loses its unique status, and you can just read a poem or read someone else, or you can get the same awareness from it. So it seems to me to be, yes, of course, he would say it's really selten and wenigen, so people don't talk like this all the time. But if you want to get at the heart of what this is about, you have to put it like this. I think that is the implicit attitude behind it. And, you know, insofar sometimes people say, what is philosophy? Philosophy is the struggle against bad philosophy. So there is no outside point, starting point or something, but it is. So he tries to find a way to say something that speaks to a bad way of thinking that we have a lot of the time. When we think that the things are just there and we put labels on them, that those are words, and if we don't know how to say something, it's just because we haven't got the right label yet. So we'll get it or make it, and then we can say it. He's trying to get us away from that and to say language is something completely different. That is just how it appears to us, but that's not what it is. My feeling is that I tend much more to say there are many ways in which you can make that point or come to that insight. It doesn't have to be through Unterwegs zur Sprache. But I think Heidegger my feeling is that with Heidegger you get a very strict claim that this is the way.
Is Heidegger focusing on a few particular verified instances of language in philosophical thinking and poetry, and he's purporting to give an account of language in general, but he's neglecting the everyday use of language. Is that
your point?
what you were saying? Do you think?
Yeah. So what I think is, if he is right, we can take his view that what he's talking about is really the nature of language, and that just somehow denies how we talk every day. It just denies that how we use the language, and I'm not sure whether this work can be accomplished.
But so does poetry. Poetry is not how we talk every day either. So I think
No,
that
Heidegger's
Heidegger's not. So when we say Heidegger's trying to talk about the nature of language, I don't think he is trying to say this is what language is altogether. This is how we always speak. That you can make these claims about language in all instances.
So for me, the language that he talks about is very special use of language.
Yeah, and so for me, the expectations of the text are therefore lowered, and so I think that Heidegger takes himself very seriously, but that doesn't trouble me very much because he's talking about poetry here. He's not talking about the nature of language, and so I don't feel that there is something wrong with his view, because I think that I have the power myself to contextualize it, to say, well, he's talking about poetry, or, well, I've read Wittgenstein as well. So I'm not sure to what extent we can seriously say that Heidegger thinks that he's the only person, he thinks that he is the only person you should read.
No, that's not a point. So I think how he does
I think that was your point.
That was my point, yeah.
Yes.
I think you are a little bit like Odysseus, who is sort of waxed up his ears and as they go past the siren, so that you try to not get drawn into it, and you try to say, okay, I've got my own sense of judgment.
Wait, who said the siren, as in Heidegger?
Yeah, Heidegger is the siren.
mysticism, yeah.
Heidegger is the siren call.
Right.
And you say, well, no, hang on, I can just observe it.
But you think Heidegger is the siren call because he's talking about the nature of language, and it's not really helpful to how we think about everyday language.
No, so my point is, of course, he used a lot of examples of poetry, but I don't think that, as you said, he's only trying to talk about the nature of poetry or nature of language used in poetry. I think for him, poetry is a method, is a tool to review us what he thinks to be the nature of language. So I think he is talking about the nature of language, as he said, der Weg zur Sprache.
Okay, yeah.
And he said, das Wesen der Sprache. He's very specific, is the language, not the language.
Yeah.
But he thinks probably poetry is the best way, the best method to get it.
And I think you're right, and that's why this isn't a piece of literary criticism, because he's using poetry as a tool for his own philosophizing. But I think in a way that's not an unfair assessment of what poetry does. It does act as a springboard to nothing, and that is coming up as well. I think that for me, poetry does do that anyway. It does make me think about the nature of language, or particular poems do. So I suppose if he is talking about the mystical nature of language by using poetry as a tool for doing that, it's certainly not original. So we could criticise other people for doing that as well.
Well, it's a good point that this is not literary criticism. I think that's an important thing to note. There is there's something else going on. He's trying. At the end, he ends by this text ends by talking about the relation between poetry and thinking, and saying they concern the same thing. But this relation to language that it puts us in, the other relation to language, is also another relation to being. So the relation to language is the relation to being, if you can use that word, relation. The point is to get into a changed relation to being, another experience with language, which is that we come to the point where we see how language opens up the world, while at the same time that is something that's given to us. It's given. It's something that we can, in responding, thank for, and all of that comes from somewhere beyond gods and man and heaven and earth. So it just as in, like, I don't know how to put it, but just as in Sein and Zeit, as it were, if you have he later distanced himself from it, but you could say the point of that book is not just to explain certain things about existence, but to put us in a different relation to our own existence. Once we've understood it, we are put in a different relation to our existence. We become authentic by reading and Sein and Zeit. And so it is with this book. The book itself is, reading the book is the being on the way to
journey.
It's a journey. We are journeymen on the auf der Wanderschaft to a changed relation to language, which is a relation to being. And that's the whole point. The language of being, the being of language. Sprache, the sein, 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 the Sprache. So, and that is always the. I don't know.
Do you think we can get the same effect by just reading lots of poetry, or?
Well, yeah, that's what you're also suggesting, right? That's what you would say.
Yeah, I think that's a question that I had when I was reading this was, well, I certainly wouldn't have read the Stefan George poem and thought all of the things that Heidegger thought. So, in that sense, in a way, it does do what a text of literary criticism does for me, in that it throws up ideas from the poem that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of myself. So I think that, as you said, Heidegger is trying to say this is the way to do things, and he's trying to achieve a particular paradigm shift. So that's what we were talking about when we were talking about dualisms and so on. And so I don't think he thinks that you can do that just from reading loads and loads and loads of poetry. He's trying to show you a way of reading poetry. So the idea that you just get all this from reading lots and lots of poetry, training, the idea of training is absent from that, or the idea of progress. So that's why dialogue is also important, because there's the idea of a process without end, but also one which makes progress.
Yeah. Can I just play this to you very briefly, because it seemed to me, as I was preparing this with my Yorkie Paul over the weekend, Gauti Paul, I listened also to the Brandenburg concertos, and it suddenly dawned, what you were just saying, it suddenly dawned on me or it dawned on me, but I thought, so is this, so I think this interpretation that you're proposing goes into the direction of saying it's baroque. It's this perpetual circling around something, and yeah. And I heard that very, very clearly suddenly just because I was reading it in this bit from the Brandenburg concertos. I don't know if it comes across now. I don't even know if the sound is on. The rhythm of this song is as marvelous as it is clear. It is enough to suggest it with a short remark. Rhythm, rhythmus, does not mean flux and flowing, but rather form. Rhythm is what is at rest, what forms the movement of dance and song, and thus lets it rest within itself. Rhythm bestows rest. In the song we just heard, the structure shows itself if we pay heed to the one fugue which sings to us in three forms. In the three stanzas, secure soul and southern side, stem and storm, sea and sham. That's from the text, yeah. But to me, when I heard that, I had to think of that, and I thought, we have here this fugue. We have these. I don't know if it's three, but it's a number of melodic lines, and if you take them apart, they can stand on their own. And what the musical piece as a whole bestows is rhythm, not flux or flowing, but form. A kind of what you hear there is, that's why Bach is such a great composer. What you hear is, you hear the silence, not as silence, but you hear it as granting the sound, granting the melody. Just as we can in poetry. We can hear what grants language to us. And that in itself is never something that can be said, because it is not something outside of language for Heidegger. It is the versagen in the verzichten or the versagen in saying, and that's different from Bach, because in Bach it's not. It is that other thing that becomes. Why is that such great music? Because we hear that there is something that makes all of that music possible. That's how this is a personal rendition, of course, of it, but what you hear there is the space in which this music can happen. That's why it is so beautiful. And it remains beautiful, but Heidegger would say that's beautiful, but it's sort of metaphysical.
Does he actually comment on Bach?
Not in his book.
Where? No, I'm really curious.
I don't know actually if he. I just think he must.
Because I wondered if you would think that this was metaphysical.
Yeah. But why would you think it wasn't?
Well, because I agree with your interpretation, because I think that he thinks that the poem is so special because it has this rhythm, it has a form, it does things with language in a way that plays with what you say, what you don't say. It shows how even though the poem doesn't say everything possible about the nature of language and what can be said, it still manages to have some kind of harmony in itself, or some kind of composition which makes you see both what is lacking and also what is represented kind of completely, as it were. So you kind of see the absence and what is there and what you think might lie in between. I don't know. That sounds very mystical. But basically, he's trying to explain why art can seem to throw us into speculation, or art can seem to deliver us something that is not contained within it. So that's what the Baroque music does, because the Baroque music isn't giving us a particular image or anything like that. It's it is made from physical phenomena.
Exactly. And so there's your box standard Baroque, which hints at something that's not there, and there is this which stands in that which cannot be heard, and through hearing it, you are in it yourself.
Yeah, I'm sure Heidegger would be delighted with that kind of Baroque. That sounded very Heideggerian.
That does sound. That's true. Yeah, that's true. So maybe. I don't know. It's also maybe a personal judgment or a kind of taste judgment that I think this is really beautiful, whereas this is not beautiful.
This being Heidegger's text.
Heidegger's text.
Yeah. So I mean, Johan is not very poetic.
That's right. Yeah.
I think actually Sein is far more poetic because it's more self-consistent. So like
that has a kind of strenge, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that Heidegger is still trying to differentiate between poetry and philosophy here.
Yeah.
So I think that he wouldn't want us to believe that we could all, as it were, speak in poetry or speak in Baroque music. But he wants to maintain the distinction between us and art. But he also wants to find why is it that we feel connected to poems and rhythm and so on. Why does it do something for us?
He talks in the poem. He talks about the moment where, in his analysis or in his thinking with the poem, he points out that the poet says that he is sad. Or sadly, he had to acknowledge das Wort gebricht. Kann nie sein, das Wort gebricht. And then he says, but this is a kind of sadness that morphs into joy. And that is precisely what we can hear, I think, maybe in what we just heard. In the flutes. Were they flutes? Yeah, I think they were flutes. These flutes had a kind of melancholic tone to them, but at the same time they were intensely joyous. This is maybe the most. It's an allegro. It's maybe one of the most joyous pieces of the Brandenburg concertos, but in a kind of withheld sort of way, verhalten almost.
It's the counterpoint, the lower counterpoint rhythm that's constantly there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of, it's a joyous, it's a melancholy that becomes joy, yeah, that's the counterpoint, exactly.
And
the Jahr 9.
So even though Heidegger's not writing poetically here in such a way that we can enjoy it, he's interested in how music can seem to be joyous and expressive, but how it also has a kind of that kind of reservation as well of formal constraints. And so I think that's what he thinks good art is that combination between something that seems to express something, but also something that inhabits its the formal constraints, but doesn't see it as constraints, but possibility, as it were. And so that's the same conundrum that we were talking about earlier, which is Heidegger's thinking about philosophy and how philosophy can kind of it's not too rigorous in that it's saying this is the term for so-and-so and this is the term for so-and-so, how it can be a continuous process, but how saying that philosophy has no end doesn't mean that philosophy has no rigour, or that everyone can just do philosophy how they like. Because that, in the arts, that would be the equivalent to saying everyone can make music as they like and it's all equally beautiful.
We're all artists.
Not everyone
I'm just quoting Joseph Joyce. What do you think of that? Is everyone an artist or musician?
Oh, well, there's art and craft. Everyone can approach the craft. Everyone can write food if they learn the rules. The artistry is in the universal. I hate these words about art, but in the universal meaning that sort of resonates through time. Why it resonates? Most of the times it's historical. Why people reapply meaning to older music is historical. I think that why Bach is working is because it's exceptional craft and genius, which is the case of geniuses throughout history, and then very good composers that are not geniuses but we appreciate them, and then the rest of the artists. Now I don't know, these discussions about art always annoy me. I mean, what I don't understand in this text we're reading right now is what sort of being we understand through the kind of art that Heidegger is trying to replicate through transforming into philosophy. I would start from the fact that I really dislike the poems he reads. They do not. Even for their time, they're behind their time. In 1959, I was trying to think of Dada poems. You were talking about poetry and how language, blah, and I'm thinking of Dada poetry and how it's nonsense and silence, but it's ingenious and it says much more than romantic. And I would never think of Heidegger as connected to Baroque. Romanticism, German romanticism at its best. This projection into massive ideas that transcend human experience. I don't think I would connect that to Baroque. Baroque music is much more pragmatic in a sense.
But Heidegger also has a pragmatism to him as well. So
yes, but his form is not.
He writes a lot about
his
that.
form is not pragmatic.
What about Jahr 9? Would you say that's transcendental? Sometimes his language is deliberately obstructive. Sometimes for me it just, so when he's talking about the strike between God and mention, it sounds incredible and, very dramatic, the thing that goes beyond that struggle, and then he talks about Jahr 9. It's almost like I've got an old man in front of me shrugging. For me, sometimes he brings you down to earth as well.
Yeah,
so
that sounds very real.
Romantic.
That sounds very real to me.
Yeah.
So that sounds very honest. The rest of it is the persona
so,
of the great.
I'm saying the persona is interrupted. Like, he's not the German romantic.
Well, one scholar who used to hang around these parts, who's now left, said at some point, Heidegger's really a pragmatist. If he would have been American, it would be William James.
He's so absolutely pragmatist that sometimes he seems to be like a transcendental pragmatist in a way. So Wittgenstein kind of knows where to stop with pragmatism. Whereas Heidegger wants to equate form and content.
He makes even pragmatism.
He wants to equate it to such an extent.
His own form is very, I don't know, it seems like his form is destroying this pragmatism that I understand in his text.
That is true. That is true. But once, so could it not be that he is a pragmatist who doesn't really know of himself that he is a pragmatist, and that's why he has to give.
But that's not art. That's bad art.
That's bad. But that's why he has to give.
It's philosophy art.
He has to give all of this.
Part of it is art.
He has to give all of this a special meaning.
It's writing. Anything that has to do with, it's part of it is literature. Of course, part of it is.
But then, so what? So you were talking about taste, for instance. So you were saying if you were to write this essay at that time, you would pick Dada poetry. So so you're saying that all art. So you're saying that all writing is art. But quite often, so if you're say going to an exhibition of modern art and you see, I can't remember who it was by, but the unmade bed, and it's kind of this is art. So some people say this is art, and that's a value judgment, and some people say this is not art. So saying something like all writing is art is saying there's no value judgment at all, but you do agree with value judgment because you would say if I were choosing poetry that does make us think differently about language, that does show that play of absence and meaning, I would choose Dada poetry, not this, because this is not as good poetry as that. So what I'm saying is that when some people say this is not art, the way Heidegger's writing, is that they're kind of saying they're making a value judgment, as well as what also seems to be on the surface.
I think that value judgment is not personal. This is 1956. I think that this is historical value judgment.
I agree, yeah.
So
what's missing
personal
from
value
him
judgment.
saying this poem is beautiful, and also from someone saying Bach is beautiful and exceptional and genius, is the historical mechanisms behind that. So Heidegger doesn't help us with that. He doesn't help us understand the historical mechanisms that form taste or canons, or what people define as art.
I think he just ignores this aspect of art.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah,
which is a bias.
It's not,
This is just bias.
He doesn't. And I don't think
I'm not
he
missing the historical aspect.
He's very anti-historicist. Yeah.
And he's anti-modern as well. He doesn't. So he has. It's all from the point of view of taste. It's all dark brown, black forest, gatto. It's sort of ulkig. It's that sort of.
And yet he himself doesn't write very traditionally.
No, he
which
doesn't.
is interesting.
Yeah, but that's right. But I think I agree with you. The examples that he chooses are all this sort of slightly stale, slightly stale kind of experience of art.
So I'm a little bit worried about the being he's looking for through this. This art.
But then, if you were to swap it
That's
out
right,
with some
but
other type of
makes
poetry,
sense.
like Dada poetry,
Yeah.
you're saying that you would make the same conclusions as he does about the nature of language or the nature of poetry, what poetry does, if you just had different poems.
If you just have different poems.
It's an interesting question, yeah.
I don't think he would be writing philosophy. If he were true to reproducing Dada philosophy, he would be writing anti-philosophy, first of all. So I don't think if he would ever reach these conclusions. I don't know if there is such thing as anti.
Well, he's not a postmodernist.
As in anti-art, that Dada. I mean, I brought
in some
Dada
ways
into the
he
discussion
is.
as an
Well,
example.
he is
But it's
an
interesting
anti-philosopher because
Yeah,
he says we have to move from philosophy to denken.
He's
In that sense,
anti.
he is
That's even more conservative.
So
anti-philosophy is
so
not
the-
revolutionary. It's
Yeah,
more
so
conservative.
the concerning thing is that he's anti-professional. So he doesn't like the idea of the stuffy academic philosopher. That's why he writes in this way. That's why he's not referencing Kant and Plato all the time. This is very different to, say, a philosophy lecture or something like that.
I'm sorry, but then he's
about
wrong.
But does he have to be right in order for us to read it?
I don't mean wrong as in what he says is not correct. I mean wrong as in when you're trying to be anti-establishment from within the establishment, you do not become a bad version of the establishment. You break the establishment. I mean, my examples show.
But how can you break the establishment but also be within it and do that well?
That's a function of the avant-garde. That's what every avant-garde in all the arts does. They challenge the establishment by breaking the norms and the forms and bringing it one step forward.
But wouldn't you argue that that creates a new intellectual elite that then becomes institutionalized again?
Yeah.
So the process has to happen all over again.
Yeah.
So what we're witnessing here is not someone who's actually achieved that.
Exactly.
They're just part of the process.
So he didn't achieve what he supposedly tried to do.
But did Dada do that?
Of course he did.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No. Because
Have
I
you
don't
seen the unnamed
because-
beds?
No,
This is Dada all the way. Dada hadn't happened.
But
You wouldn't have seen that word.
but you still get so all of my acquaintances, I would say, all of my family, they would say that's not art. So how does Dada engage people? What it does is it creates a new intellectual elite.
What's that? I don't know why.
So only people who agree with the manifesto of things like avant-garde, Dada, etc., for them only does what art is change. So what we're seeing here is someone who's being anti-professional, who's saying, I want to change things, but his taste hasn't changed. So he's not confronting his own historicist impulses at all. And that's also what people who look at avant-garde art in modern art galleries do not do either. They don't question the idea of taste. They don't question where it comes from. They just say that's not art, and they walk away and they don't understand it, and then the conversation
So they
ends.
didn't understand Dada.
So
these are the people who do not understand what Dada is.
I'm saying that avant-garde can often confront people in a way that ends the conversation and makes them not think about what art is or change their view of art
Avant-gardes
at
are
all.
not teachers.
But I'm saying, how is that a success?
Well, it is a success because we are.
For some people.
We don't-
So we have to relativize what we call success.
Relativize what we call success.
Avant-garde would imply that there is somewhere to go to.
That's a Heidegger.
And it's clear that Heidegger would say, well, the only place to go to is where we came from. Herkunft bleibt Zukunft. That's what he says in the dialogue. So I agree that Heidegger would have fundamental problems with the idea of the avant-garde. I think, right? And that's why he doesn't buy into doesn't buy in, I mean, you know, he's not language, but he's not a modernist.
Yeah, okay, but you have to acknowledge it somewhere. It is something that
Yeah,
happens.
of
It is
course.
part of the
Yeah.
reality he's
That's right,
describing.
and he would just say, that's technology.
But he's also,
So
he's also not an
Dada
art
is technology.
historian. He's also not an art historian, sorry to interrupt, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to say,
He's not an
in
answer.
answer to your comment that he has to comment about avant-garde somewhere, he's not an art
No,
historian.
my problem is not that he's not commenting. My problem is that he's unaffected by something that changed.
And
Yeah.
so
The
doesn't
conception-
that show why is he unaffected then? If Dada is so effective, why is he unaffected?
Are you asking my opinion or are you anti-Dada? I'm a bit confused right now.
No, I'm not
My-
anti-Dada, but I'm saying that Dada only changes the opinion of people who are already interested in the avant-garde, who are already interested in changing their mind about art. So I'm saying that Heidegger is not an art historian, and so the absence of Dada here shows very clearly that he's anti-historicist again. say.
No, he just
He's
doesn't
not
question.
questioning.
It just
I
doesn't.
see
I'm
that.
agreeing with
So,
you.
that you could say that I see your
So I'm
point
agreeing
you're
with you,
making.
but you feel that the historicism element should be in there, and I'm disagreeing with you on that point. I'm not disagreeing
It's
with
not
you that you can.
historicism. It's all the whole of modern music. It's the whole of modern painting. He's just renouncing everything before 1901. He just
Wait, so you think
ignores
that the yoga
everything.
doesn't count as modern poetry? Because it definitely came under modern poetry when I was studying it.
Which one? There.
Stefan Yoga?
Well, it's modern poetry, but it's
In terms of history, but not in
for us,
terms of
it's
form.
over 100 years old, but not necessarily for him.
Yes, but in terms of form and ideas, it's not modern. It belongs to a different century in terms of spirit, spirit and form.
So he's being universalist in his conversations about what poetry does. That's why he talks about Wort, Sagen, and so on. That's why it's not literary criticism.
Yes, and to me, the fact that he just ignores the world around him as it is, it means that he's just out of date in his own time, and I can see that in the way he writes.
so that's it's very interesting, I think, and it's sort of the fact that this turns out to be a contentious issue. So Heidegger, I think, would have no problem to say, I'm out of time in my own time. That's what I want to be. Unzeitgemäße betrachten.
And I also think that he's very much of his time. I think that he's anti-professional. He is, what do you call it? Reactionary, culturally reactionary.
That's
so
right.
I think so he's of his time. Like, so he's not aware of his time because he's not looking at himself from a historical perspective, but he is of his time.
But there were many people in his time who were not reactionary. It was interesting, when I was in Switzerland a couple of weeks ago on a conference, there was a good friend of mine from Israel, we were together, and we visited the Magritte exhibition, which was going on in Lugano at the time. And Magritte is also one of these people who sort of are always courting with fascism, as it were. And a lot of his works are from this period, 30s, 40s, and he shows absolutely there's a total depoliticization of art in Magritte. There's a total, so it almost, you know, as if he didn't realize it himself, but he almost goes into this metaphysical realm as a way to not look at what's happening in the world.
But he's reproducing it.
And thereby he's reproducing it, and so it's a typical example of bourgeois culture in that sense. And so my friend from Israel said, who of course, you know, lost his family from a few generations ago in the war, he said, well, yes, what was he doing? You know, he was probably, well, he was painting, and what were all these other people doing? They were otherwise engaged, you know, they were being murdered. And so there is a kind of, that is here, that is something of that atmosphere is here. I think you can't deny that. The return to Georgia rather than other people from that period is also a way of removing himself from this political.
And I thought it's very tasteless that he chooses a poetry collection called Das Neue Reich.
Yeah, that's not it.
But of course he could only get away with that in Vienna.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. They probably liked it. Ja, that's right. Das Neue Reich. Blätter für die Kunst, 1919. I mean, that's all true, yeah? And even Hannah Arendt says that about him. He lived in a different, she says he just lived in a different world. He was more, Plato was more real to him than what was happening 20 miles down the road. And I don't think she means it exactly as an excuse, but she does say that that's what he is.
So about who's being talking? If he's not exactly comfortable in his own time, what sort of being is he looking for? That's why I have a problem with this. I don't have a problem with it. That's what I don't understand. You know, what is this being that he's looking for if he's not in tune with his own times as an artist? Because I do believe that what he's trying to do here is art. I do believe that he thinks himself an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm saying to me, he's a bad artist. And you know, the function of every good artist in their own time is to embody the past and they produce it into a future, which is part of the function of each avant-garde as well. They're very special people. That's why I'm wondering what sort of aura is he trying to reproduce through his own art, this artwork, let's say, this piece of art, supposedly. What is the being he's looking for if he's not a receptor of what's happening around him?
But do you have to look at the artwork in terms of intention?
I didn't say anything about intention.
So you're saying, what is he trying to achieve? What being is he looking for? Is that a question of intention?
No, I'm talking about the fabric of the being he's looking for, the content.
But you're still talking about what he's looking for rather than what you experience as a result of the text.
Yes, because I don't experience, because I think this is bad art. I didn't experience much from this text. It was.
And so good art is something that you agree with, or something which makes you feel good.
Please don't put the words in my mouth. I've never said
No,
that.
but all right. So good art is something that we like, which we agree with, and so that's why when you walk into an art gallery and you see something which affronts you, you say that's not art. I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's up for debate whether he would equate.
We can go to an art gallery together and see what we think about art.
But my point is that actually quite often this antagonism is quite often the intention behind art. So good art doesn't always make you feel like, I got what the artist was looking for, because art is presented to you as an object. The author's dead. And so we can't constantly talk about what Heidegger wants, what Heidegger was looking for, because in a way that's very Heideggerian, because we're trying to denken nach Heidegger, which is useful in itself, but at some point it's got to stop and you've just got to say, like you did, I didn't get anything out of this, this is what I experienced, and that is valid. I just think that questions that are based around intentionality in terms of Heidegger, so what is Heidegger looking for here, what is he trying to say here, are one, in a way, very anti-Heideggerian, because he's very much kind of saying, oh, we're not trying to label something as something, we're not trying to get somewhere, we're going to be constantly on the way. But I think it's also very unhelpful, because there is nothing there, especially in Unterwegs or Sprache.
But isn't language a way to being?
Yeah, so that's the point.
Isn't it a method of getting to be? So I'm trying to understand, if he's using this language, what sort of being he's envisioning, what sort of being he's experiencing. That's what I'm trying to understand.
And so maybe the questioning itself is the intention. So rather than telling you exactly what kind of being it is, he's trying to get you to ask what he means by being, or what he means by sagen, and so on and so forth. So it's the production of questions like that, rather than the answering of questions like that, that is the aim of the book.
You could say that. You could also point to the fact that he says himself, but language is monologue, not in the sense in which Novalis meant it, as a kind of working out of a subjectivity, that's this intentionality, this stance of the subject. He tries to distance himself from that completely. Whether that's successful or not, that's another matter. But so we have to take this book too, in a way, as a kind of monologue that reverberates within itself. And if anything, what it does is it puts us in our place as readers of this book. And then we can see if that, reading that book opens up something or shows us something about language and therefore about being and what that then might be. So in that sense the book renounces, just as Heidegger has been saying, and it is not just ein Versagen in the sense of failure, but it is also, it renounces itself to us, right? So and that there it becomes a kind of poem, maybe. The book renounces itself to us. That's why we have such a fucking hard time reading it.
This is not a book, right? This is a series of lectures.
Yes, well, it is a series of lectures.
Published
Yeah.
as a book.
No, but it was published as a book.
So this is not something. These
So
are not
I
the
like what
lectures
you
as
said.
they were delivered
It's this
necessarily.
Yeah, sorry.
So, yeah, they're not the lectures as they were delivered necessarily.
No, so I liked that point that you said this is it's this
It
thing.
is a unit.
This is it, yeah, and it renounces itself to us. And the claim, so, and that's all, and in a way, I'm very happy with this discussion because we end on the note of what, but is it art? Which in itself is of course very, that question itself is, you know, is sort of its own, but moreover than that, moreover we have had an experience with language because we have experienced this book as doing what it sort of says on the tin. It renounces itself to us. And for me that is a big conclusion in the sense of that puts a lot in context of what disquieted me or keeps on disquieting me about the text. And I can see that engaging with this text, reading it and talking about it, puts me back into my own place in terms of language, which is a place of question, is not a fixed answer, but maybe a possibility to an experience, for an experience. And all of these points, I mean, I completely agree with you. His taste is terrible. The poetry is old-fashioned, and you know that's all true. But even that puts us back. Is something that puts us back to ourselves. So in the sense in which the book refuses any kind of, the book is like an upsheet. It is itself. You know, it talks about this scheiden, this separation. The book separates itself from us, and in doing that it grounds us something. So we can be grateful. We can thank Heidegger. Yeah.
No, I can agree with many of your points. I do have a fixation with them. I find them fascinating, and of course I'm not in this sense. I can understand the value of a piece of writing that is not trying even to be avant-garde, but it is content with showing a different
Exactly. Yeah, that's it.
A different aspect of the world that, because it's, let's say that it has become fixated on progressing, whether you know we want to call that avant-garde or progress itself, it sticks with I don't want to say preconceived ideas, but with more traditional approaches to a way forward without renouncing the old world, in essence. It's renouncing modernism, in a sense, isn't it? It's very traditional. No, I mean, I can appreciate.
But in a good way.
This,
well, again, let's say it puts us in. It makes us experience that as a question. What about the avant-garde?
I don't know. Ezra Pound was anti-modernism, modernist, but he's avant-garde.
Yeah.
So I do struggle with the idea of, whether the world can exist without avant-garde, and whether it can exist with...
Yeah. Well, but if we
the
go
world,
too far...
maybe the world cannot exist without avant-garde, but Heidegger can.
Heidegger can.
Sure, yes, he
and-
did fine that case.
And we are trying, we are saying, well, it is too much to say, here's the avant-garde, and there is Heidegger and his conservative crew. So if anything, if we try to do justice to the text, then, or if we take the text for what it says, then we have to say it tries to put us in touch with something that is other than the question, are we avant-garde or conservative, or are we reactionary or progressive? And whether that in itself is how you judge that idea that there is something else than the question, are you reactionary or progressive? That's again an open question. I mean, for somebody like Adorno would have absolutely no qualms about it. That gesture itself is a reactionary gesture. Yeah? So for Adorno, that's absolutely clear that this is, by saying, oh, I'm not talking about politics, it is giving way to, it is furthering a very particular agenda in terms of power and domination. But I mean, yeah, I don't think we can solve that question. I think I think we can say that if nothing else, in many ways, the text has, at least that's my view, has allowed us for a few weeks to think about or to get into the vicinity of an experience with language, whatever that is, whatever that may be. And for me, so, I mean, you know, we're going to stop now because it's 6:15. But for me, the idea that the book renounces, the book is ein Versagen itself, also in renouncing itself to us, that is a kind of, gives me a sense of closure with this text. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your contributions. I think they were really wonderful, all of you. And we will be forever be recorded because I'm unavailable on YouTube to watch our discussions again and again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. And we'll go for a drink in the rising sun as usual.